Go ahead, Luann.
Hi, everybody. I'm Luann. I'm an alcoholic. I want to start off by saying happy belly button birthday, Amy, and thanks to you and everybody else that makes this meeting possible. And Tom, thank you for being willing. Thank you for sharing everything that you have to share. I've been taught that imitation is the highest form of flattery. And so my introduction is going to be the one I intended to give. This might sound familiar to anybody who listened last week. The intro I'm going to give, and the intro that I wish I gave when my head hits the pillow tonight. So anyway, Tom, this program is a program of attraction, not promotion. And I want what you have. It's just that simple. You've got an open, beautiful heart and you share it so freely. And I think your brain needs to be bubble wrapped and preserved. So without any further hesitation, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Luann.
Thank you, Luann. I appreciate it. I'm glad you're back. As I mentioned last week, Luann was the one who asked me to share at this meeting, and forewarned is forearmed. You know, she decided not to be here last week. I love you, Luann. It's great to see you. Thank you for asking me to do this, and Amy, thank you for your service and the group Conscience. I'm an alcoholic. My name is Tom, and it's wonderful to be here tonight. You know, there's probably some other places I could be on a Saturday night, and probably some other things I could be doing, but you know, there's probably no better place I could be, and probably nothing better that I could be doing. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. It didn't just save my life; it changed it into one worth living, and I'm truly grateful. It's always a privilege to be asked to do service in AA. And I'm grateful for that, especially right now on AA's birthday. Happy birthday, AA, 86 on Thursday. You know, without which, and it's a miracle that it's here. I'll talk about that maybe a little bit more at the end, but I talked about that last week, that, you know, AA is beyond magic. It's about mystery and miracle. AA is not a certainty. AA is a possibility, and I need to keep that in mind and be a good steward of the faith. So the fine print, the legalese. I'm an alcoholic. My name is Tom Roach. My sobriety date is June 26th, 2001, and my home group is the Central Fact Group, which meets at St. Ambrose Church on Federal Highway in Deerfield Beach Friday night at 7:30. A double speaker open meeting with the focus on the central fact from page 25 in There's a Solution in chapter 2 from the big book. As I said, I get nervous when I speak. I developed a habit years ago, the lighter side. I've got so much I want to kind of get in tonight that I'm going to forego that. I'm gonna say this. I'll give you a couple of quick remembrances of Nell Wing. And if you're new, Nell Wing was AA's first archivist and third secretary after Ruth Hawk and Bobby Berger. And you know, she started cataloging a lot for just great AA. You know, some of you may be familiar with her, you know, grateful to have been there. But she talks about letters being written into AA, and there's some funny things going on in early AA. You know, we've got meetings in Virginia where they serve beer, but not hard liquor. You know, we've got meetings in Florida where guys are selling sponsorship, like taking you through the steps. And a couple of my favorite letters, which are one from a wife of a husband saying, my husband, you know, wrote a couple of months ago to you about, you know, getting information on AA and getting into AA. And I've been asking him about how that's going. And he says that he's waiting for an opening, that right now there's no openings in Alcoholics Anonymous. Another letter that's in the archives that Nell Wing used to talk about was one from an alcoholic, from a drunk, saying, I just want to thank AA for your program. I tried it 2 weeks ago. By the way, it doesn't work. And So, we're good. We're fun and we're free. And there's no more entertaining place than Alcoholics Anonymous. So with that, I'm going to get into where we left off. And where we left off was Roland Hazard leaving Carl Jung and coming back to the United States and nestling down in New York at the Episcopal Calvary Church and being schooled in the Oxford Group method by Sam Shoemaker, who's kind of running the Oxford Group in the United States out of New York. And he gets schooled in the Oxford Group method, which, as I mentioned, if you want to look at the 6 steps, that there are no 6 steps to the Oxford Group. I think I qualified that last week, but there are some principles that we are taking from the Oxford Group. They're on Roman numeral 16 in the forward to the 2nd edition in the front of your book. And it says moral inventory, that would be step 4, confession. It says, although he, and this is Bill talking about himself, although he could not accept all the tenets, meaning principles of the Oxford Group, he did see the need for moral inventory, step 4, confession, that would be 5, right? Restitution, 9, helpfulness to others, 12, and belief in or guidance and direction from a higher power, that would be 11. So when people talk about the steps of the Oxford Group, they're referring to 4, 5, 9, 12, and 11, and the alcoholics inside the Oxford Group are making up a first step, we're licked by alcohol. So that's what people refer to. I know sometimes people go to Earl Treat, his story's in the back of the book. He sold himself short. AA historians, they have a problem with that. He's a sponsee of Dr. Bob's. He's as much against the big book as most people in Akron. That story's not in the 1st edition. And one of the challenges with non-contemporaneous notes is that memory often recalls what the present wants to hear. A really good version of the steps is if you've ever heard Clarence describing his going through the steps with Dr. Bob, and that's probably one of the most accurate versions. And we see that repeated again and again. You go to the hospital for a couple of weeks, and a number of AAs come and see you, and then on the last day, Dr. Bob would come and basically 12-step you for a couple hours, and that was it. You were through the steps, and sometimes, like with Clarence, he would take you to the meeting that night. Wednesday night at King's School, or actually that was before King's School. That was at his house. At Clarence's house, T. Henry Clarence Williams. So that's where the steps of the Oxford Group, as it were, that they're doing. And the fact that he gets with Sam Shoemaker, who becomes a spiritual advisor with Bill, is a really big deal. Sam Shoemaker, he's the rector of Episcopal Calvary Church. But what he said is, one religious argument is as good as another, but experience always beats an argument. And we can also see the influence on step 2. I talked about this a little last week. I'll talk about that in a few minutes, about Bill not having a step 1 problem by the time he gets sober. It's a step 2 problem. But we can see the echoes of Sam Shoemaker, before I leave Sam Shoemaker, in that. And Sam Shoemaker said, the romance of religion is the romance of risk. And here it is. Faith is not sight. It is a high gamble. And we can see Bill paraphrasing that when he says in We Agnostics that the bridge of reason does not extend to the shore of faith. The implication Bill's making is that there will need to be a leap of faith there for a second step. And that's Bill's whole dilemma in the 3rd quarter of his story, the first half devoted to the progression of alcoholism. When we look at the design of the big book, which I love, and unfortunately, I probably won't have that much time to talk about tonight, but that's a whole. If we know the history, the design of the big book is just divine in the brilliance of its construction. Roland Hazard gets schooled in this Oxford Group method, and he's up in Vermont, and he's going to meet the next character, Ebby Thatcher. Ebby Thatcher, Bill's sponsor. So Ebby Thatcher is from an Albany family heavily involved in politics, and Ebby Thatcher is mentioned in in Bill's story, when Bill talks about, we see Bill take a first step on the top of page 8, and at the bottom, he talks about at the end of that bleak November, I get a call from a friend, near the end. That's Ebby Thatcher, right? So Ebby Thatcher is a boyhood friend that they met at Burton Academy in Manchester, Vermont. Ebby's family summered in Manchester, Vermont. And one summer, he decides to stay throughout the school year and attend school for 1 year at the same high school as Bill Wilson. And they become really good friends. They take a liking to each other, and they'll be friends for the rest of their lives. Neither of them ever has a drink when they know each other, when they first meet each other in high school. Bill never drinks in high school, and Ebby has not had a drink either when they meet. And so Ebby then returns to Albany Academy in New York State to go to high school, and eventually leaves and starts working at his family foundry with the family company, and he goes on for years, and then he does become a bad drunk. What we say, in 1929, he has, I'll go back up. In 1925, he has the first of what we look at as his big bad, drinking incidents. And in 1925, he drives his car through the kitchen wall of a farmhouse, right? And then he opens the car door and says to the owner of the house, could I have a cup of coffee? Now, if you're new, that's an inappropriate response for drunk driving your car through somebody's kitchen wall, right? And he gets in a lot of trouble for that. As a matter of fact, it winds up on the front page of the paper. There's pictures of it. I've seen it. I think it's the Bennington Post, whichever paper it was. Brattleboro or Bennington. And so he gets in trouble with the law. He gets in trouble with the law one more time, and they have a 3-strike rule in Vermont. And if you get arrested 3 times for alcoholic drunkenness, you wind up being sent away, right? So that's where the book talks about, the last Bill had heard he was about to be sent away, right? On the top of page 9, when Bill is remembering, that the time we, took the airplane and completed the JAG into Manchester, that actually is the one time that they drank together. And in 1929, Ebby's working in the financial industry in Albany. Bill's working there in New York. Bill has some work in Albany. And so he looks up his old friend, Ebby. And as I said, they were good friends and remained in close contact, even though they weren't drinking together. And they go on a bar crawl that night. They get totally smashed. And Ebby's got a bunch of what they call flyer friends. And these are, World War I flying aces, basically. And now here they are, 10 years after World War I, and they're trying to make money. And what they would do is they would go to, we call them barnstormers. They would go to local landowners, like in Vermont, and say, I have, I'm a pilot, and I can do airplane maneuvers and tricks, and circles and whatnot. And I can do that, and you have the land. Why don't we put on an air show, and we'll charge the locals to come, and then you and I will split the profits. One of those barnstormer friends is a guy named Ted Burke. So Bill and Ebby get totally smashed, and Ebby convinces Ted Burke to fly them into the newly built Manchester Airport to be the first airplane to land in the airport. There actually had been a couple other landings, but it's the first big publicized landing. And Ted Burke agrees, and they fly to Manchester Airport, and they call ahead, and the high school band comes out, and the local reporters and whatnot, and they open the airplane door, and Bill and Ebby basically spill into the landing field. They're just stone cold drunk, and they can't even talk to anybody. They have to be like snuck out of the field, and escorted away. They're completely smashed. That's what the euphoric recall that Bill is remembering, but actually the one and only time that he and his buddy Ebby drank together, and they got totally smashed and totally drunk. They're both alcoholics, right? So fast forward a few years later, here we are, and it's 1934, the summer of 1934, and Ebby's drinking is problematic, and he's got two friends in Manchester who have gotten sober in the Oxford group. And those two friends are Shep C, Shep Cornell, and Seaber Graves, Seaber G. And they call on him and say, we found a way to stop drinking. Abby's like, thank you for the information. And he said, it sounds like you guys really have something or whatnot. I don't know if I'm quite ready for all that. And he described them as he didn't even know if they were alcoholics, but they were hard drinkers, right? And Ebby says, you know what, Ebby's got to stop drinking. And so he decides to paint the house. His family wants him to paint the house. And he stops for a week or two and he gets sober and he hires a painter and they paint the house. And after the painting is done, Ebby's like, well, now I can drink again. He starts drinking. And then he looks out at the newly painted house and sees that pigeons are crapping all over his new paint job. And he gets pissed off and he goes in the house and gets a shotgun with his bottle of whiskey and comes out. It's been pouring rain and he falls on his butt onto the ground. And he's like, I want to get up and start shooting these pigeons, but why even bother getting up? I'm just going to shoot right here. And he starts shooting pigeons. He can see the neighborhood, the neighbor's window. He can see people watching him. And obviously they drop a dime on him because the police call up and he's arrested. And this is the third time. And now he's in trouble. The 3-strike rule in Vermont. He's gonna go in front of the judge. He's driven down to the judge on Friday afternoon, and the judge is too busy to see him to have a hearing, but says, I want you to be back here Monday morning and you need to be sober. On the way home, Abby's thinking about, he's got 3 or 4 bottles of Ballantine ale. Some elders on this meeting will remember Ballantine. I drank Ballantine. And he's remembering that he has 3 or 4 bottles of that downstairs in his basement in the refrigerator. And as soon as he gets home, he's going to, do some drinking. He goes home, walks downstairs, and he starts opening the fridge and says, you know what, the judge said, be sober, Monday morning. And he starts walking back upstairs. And then he starts doing that wrestling in his mind because, you know what, he didn't say anything about not drinking over the weekend. I could drink 3 or 4 and nobody's going to know it. I won't be hammered on Monday, whatnot. And he goes back and forth a few times. And then finally he makes a decision and he takes out those bottles of beer, puts them in a round paper bag, walks them over to a neighbor and decides not to drink them. And here we're going to see it with Bill and Bob as well. This 1, 2, 3 conversion of these early founders of AA, where he comes back home and he says, I made a decision not to drink and I prayed like I had never prayed before. And I told God that I was earnest this time and that I really meant business and I wanted to quit. And that I didn't, and I wasn't going to drink over the weekend because I knew the judgment in his heart, don't drink, right? And he shows up on Monday in front of the judge. So if you were on the bottom page 9 in your book, right after, Ebby makes the call on Bill, and Bill's expecting him to start proselytizing. Remember, Bill can see there's something about his eyes. It's inexplicable, unexplainable, right? And he's sober. And Bill asks him about it, and Ebby says, I got religion. The next line is, I was aghast, which means surprised, but Bill means it in a pissed off way. He wants to stop drinking. He desperately needs to stop drinking, but he sure as hell doesn't want God to be the answer, right? It's like, come on, Ebby, there's got to be a harder way, not the God thing, right? And Bill says when he finds out Ebby's not going to be drinking with him, that, that'll be more drinking for me, more alcohol for me, and, I'll just listen to his ranting. But he says when he does no ranting, he talks about how a couple of guys showed up in court and explained this simple religious idea in a program of practical action. Well, who shows up in court? It's actually 3 people, right? And it's Seaber Graves and Shep C, the Oxford groupers that have been calling on him, but it's their mentor in the Oxford group, Roland Hazard, who is considered a closer. They bring Roland Hazard to the hearing. The judge, and they appealed to let the judge to have Ebby released into their care. the judge won't release Evie into the others' care, but the others are Shep Cornell and Seaver Graves. It's Judge Horace Graves. Seaver Graves' father. He knows all about the Oxford Group. His son is in the Oxford Group. He's still not going to release, Evie to his care, but he will release Evie to Roland's care. Roland comes from a well-respected family, well-known, well-renowned in New England, and the judge releases him to his care. Evie goes and leaves with Roland and goes and stays in Shaftesbury, Vermont at Roland's house. And over the next 3 weeks, they get busy. As a matter of fact, at the end of that first week, Evie said that he did 5 talks for the Oxford Group and Roland, a couple of universities, a couple of colleges, and a couple of churches. He's just busy. He's talking about, how he's gone into this Oxford Group. He's been schooled in this Oxford Group, and now he doesn't have to drink anymore, and he's sober. And after a couple of weeks of this, Roland's like, you know what, why don't I get you down to New York? You're done with Vermont, and quite frankly, Vermont's, happy to see you go. And he goes down and he tries to get a bed at the Episcopal Calvary Mission, where Sam Shoemaker is headquartered. They have about 35 beds, for drunks and homeless, down and outers. And they have a 12-man team of Oxford groupers who are bringing other people in there. And Evie tries to get a bed there. They're all full. He stays at Shep Cornell. Seaver Graves is a lawyer. His father is the judge. Shep Cornell is a Wall Street guy living in New York. So he stays with Shep for a couple of weeks until he can get a bed at the Episcopal Calvary Mission. And he continues his schooling that Roland has started with Sam Shoemaker and the Oxford Group. And one of the things is helpfulness to others, right? So he's at church with Shep C, and they leave church and they go into what they call quiet time. And quiet time, some of you may be familiar, I mentioned it last week, John Batterson, the Oxford Group two-way prayer, right? Where you put up to God and then you write down in a stream of consciousness fashion what you get back, the guidance you get back, without a filter. The idea being that later you can check it and see what you really think is guidance and what is not guidance, and then maybe check it, meaning run it across some other Oxford groupers to see if it sounds like what we would call today, running it by a sponsor or your support group, people with spiritual consent that are willing to put, principles before personalities and give you honest criticism without being personal about it, right? So while he's in this quiet time, this helpfulness to others comes on him. He's gone down to Wall Street to look up some of his old buddies from the financial days. And what he has heard is that his buddy Bill is struggling. So it comes on him during this quiet time that he should be helpfulness to others and make a call on his friend Bill Wilson. And that's when we say, in Bill, in the whole third quarter of his book, of his story, the second step call that Evie Thatcher makes on him, right? And, I talked last week a lot about this as an oral society, sober by anecdote, and how things can change regarding story-wise. So I've heard Bill tell his story. We have Bill's story in his book. There's a couple of copies in the archives, and my 2 favorite historians in AA are Ernie Kurtz, Not God, and Bill S. William Shaberg, who just wrote about the Big Book. But I met him years ago at history symposiums on AA when he was just doing the research, and now he's completed the writing. I met him years ago, and he had given me one of the copies of Bill's original story, right? And I remember it was a dozen years ago. I was in New York, and it was a dozen years ago that I started on my pilgrimage. I left, South Florida. I had gone to all the big book seminars and the big book studies, and I mentioned all the different schools last week that I went to, whether it was Clarence or Soul Surgery or, Came to Believe or Wally P. I primary purpose, I had explored all of those. And, I started on to leave here and go to the places, the bucket list, GSO and Stepping Stones and Akron and whatnot. And but also find the people the AA historians that knew more, and I found them. I found them. And but I remember I was in New York at GSO a dozen years ago on this beginning of this pilgrimage that I had started, and it so happened that my grant sponsor was in town, and at the time, he just passed away. Recently, he was 60, 2 months shy, 62 years. But at the time, this is a dozen years ago, at 50 years, and that was the first time I had heard somebody tell Ebby's story that had seen Ebby tell his story. And he talked about, and he said, when Ebby told it, I'll give you the short version. And I'm not, when I say long story short, I am not going to break the sanctity of the long story short principle. I'm actually going to keep it short. And he said, that what Ebby said was, the more I talked, the angrier Bill got. And the more I talked, the angrier Bill got and the faster he drank, right? In other words, Bill's getting pissed off as Ebby tries to give him this spiritual solution, which makes so much sense. On page 12, when we see, Ebby kind of raise his hands and say, Bill, why don't you just choose your own conception of God, right? The frustration. And I loved hearing that story. That was the first time I'd heard that story from someone who had actually, met Bill and met Ebby and seen them both talk, right? And since then also I've heard Ebby tell his story too. We have that, right? So I've heard Bill tell his story. I've heard my grant sponsor who saw both of them, and I've heard Ebby tell his story. So we have Bill's story. In Ebby's story, again, oral society, sober by anecdote. So we have Ebby calling on Bill. So now I'm going to back up for a minute and talk about Bill Wilson. So Bill Wilson, if when we read his story, a lot of times I see people, even in big book studies, and they start with that war, fever, ran, like as if Bill's out of touch. It's just like, I don't know, sacrilegious. It's like calling him a speculator, fast talk to slow people, that type of stuff. I'm not. If I get to the pearly gates and I find out that Bill's not in, I'm pleading his case, right? I'm just to say it, right? And that can be a little sacrilegious. In South Florida is kind of like Midwestern. There's a lot of worshiping at the Akron altar down here, and the big book studies that came out of the Midwest and Texas and whatnot. So it's not as New York influenced as you would expect. But at any rate, so we have Bill in grade school, and Bill's a bright guy, but there's a couple characteristics about Bill. He's a power driver. He's obsessive. And I'm talking about paraphrasing Bill, talking about Bill, right? Not in his story, but we only have a few recordings. We can count them on one hand of Dr. Bob, and only 2 that are over 5 minutes long, right? But Bill spoke all the time, lots of recordings. He's my favorite communicator. I've heard him speak dozens and dozens of times, right? On tape, right? And so he's living with his grandparents. If you read the first 6 paragraphs that were lopped off, the first sentence in Bill's story is, I'm 10 years old and living with my grandparents. And the couple of the biggest influences on Bill's early life are, one, living with his grandparents because his parents are divorced, which he says was as much of a stigma in New England as alcoholism. And the other thing I'll get to in a minute, which is his depression. So his grandfather is saying to him, you know what, I just read a book about Australians, and in Australia, they have a weapon called a boomerang, and the thrower throws it, and if it doesn't hit the target, it returns to the caster. But no American can do it. Only Aborigines in Australia can do it. Well, that's just like Bill's obsessive. He's off, right? And Bill said for the next 6 months, every night, he was out there with the lantern in a barn trying to carve a boomerang. Finally, he finds the perfect wood and carves it out of his headboard for his bed, and throws a boomerang, comes in, gets his grandfather, and says, Grandpappy, what he called him, come on out to the churchyard. I want to show you something. And he says that his grandfather hadn't ducked, it would have cut his head off when it returned. And he was the first American, as far as we know, to successfully throw a boomerang. Bill said that after that day, he never threw it again. It was an obsession. He had completed it. He was done. Once again, his grandpappy is on him and says, you know what? Your Uncle Clarence had an ear for music, Bill, but you don't have any music for Bill, will you? You don't do that. And Uncle Clarence's, fiddle was upstairs, and Bill goes upstairs, gets out his fiddle, and builds a bridge, which was broken, goes to the local grocery store and gets some strings, makes a self-made fiddle, and self-teaches himself, And by the time Bill graduates his senior year, he's playing first violin in the orchestra, right? Bill's not that athletic, and he's having a catch with a baseball with some friends, and he misses the baseball. It hits him in the head, and he goes down. He says he was like momentarily knocked out. And all of a sudden, there's a gang of kids around him, and they're all laughing at him. And he said he jumped to his feet, and he said, "I'll show you guys. I'll be the captain of your damn baseball team." And Bill started throwing stones at telephone poles and trees, so much so that he said he developed a crooked arm. Hey, guess who was the pitcher and captain of the baseball team his senior year? President of the class, first violin. This guy was a power driver and an overachiever, right? It was everything he's got going for him except for one thing in his life. Bill's very shy, suffers from an inferiority complex, and he's got no woman in his life, no relationship. The local preacher's daughter falls for him, Bertha Bamford. And for the first time, his life is complete. He's got a successful relationship. He feels that he's over his head, but her parents like him too when he goes over there for dinner and whatnot. And Bill is just like, he has arrived, right? And then on November 19th, 1912, the head minister of Burton School calls everybody into the chapel and says, "I've got an announcement to make. Bertha died yesterday, Sunday, in some type of surgery down in New York City." And it was always mysterious. Nobody knows what it was or whatnot. And we can speculate today, maybe, who knows? I don't know what it was. But anyway, she died in the surgery. And Bill went into a deep depression, the second great influences of his young childhood. One being this power driving, overachieving to compensate for feeling inferior. And the other was his first Great Depression over losing his high school sweetheart. And he said that it was, a couple of years later when Lois comes along, that Lois was the one that pulled him out of that, right? So he meets Lois a couple of years later, and he goes to Norwich Military Academy. He meets Lois. He meets Lois. They're sailing on a lake. He's trying to impress Lois. He capsizes. She basically rescues him, which is a metaphor for the rest of their lives, right? Rescuing Bill, right? And they get married on January 24th, 1918, because he's afraid he's going to be shipped over to Europe for the war, which he is shortly thereafter, right? But he had his first rank in 1917 when they were, after Norwich Military, they're over in New Bedford, Massachusetts, about to be shipped overseas. And the local townspeople are so grateful to these young officers who are going to go, save the world and save the United States, that they have these house parties, and he has his first drink, a Bronx cocktail. It would be like a vodka screwdriver. And he writes Lois and tells her in the summer of 17. And we know he feels different, right? Something happens to him. He was a freeze-dried alcoholic. He had never, he's 21 years old, right, in the summer of 1917, and having his first drink, right, before his 22nd birthday in November, right? Bill's birthday is November 26th, 1895, right? So Lois sees that every time Bill drinks, he gets drunk. But she feels that when they get married, she will change him. As we know, she was wrong about that, right? Anyways, Bill goes overseas. He never sees any active military action. We have his little spiritual experience at Winchester, right? Winchester Cathedral. And then he comes back. He actually, on the way over, finds an alcoholic on the ship, and he winds up getting booze. So he drinks on the way over, and he drinks over there, and he drinks. Like I said, he was a freeze-dried alcoholic, right? And as Lois said, he always got drunk right from jump, right? So he comes back, and he never goes back to Vermont other than to visit. Bill's done with Vermont. Vermont has so little other than his early life to do with Bill's sobriety. And I know we have the Wilson House and whatnot, but Bill never. He's done with Vermont. He's a New Yorker, right? And he settles in the Bronx in New York. And then we have in the book, right? And he goes to law school. He's a bright guy. The only reason he's not a lawyer is he's too drunk to pick up his degree. Norwich military, he's majoring in engineering. Noah Wing said he basically had a master's in engineering, right? This is a smart guy. That all that slow talk stuff. Bill's tax return in 1928 was $29,000. That's over 400 grand today. Hey, if you're making 400 grand, you're doing okay. When it talks about, chattering in millions and he's getting going in the stock, his sumptuous apartment, Bill is doing so well that he rents the apartment next to him and breaks down the wall. So that he's renting 2 apartments so that he can hold bigger parties for his entertaining. Bill has a bright idea. So in the book where it says in it doesn't say the year, but it's 1925. When it talks about, he leaves with Lois and goes on the motorcycle trip, right? And it says we worked for a month on a dairy farm. That's Goldfoot's Dairy Farm in New York State, up by Schenectady. And so now we have a timestamp. That was the mid-April to mid-May in 1925, right? He has this bright idea that, he can help, that finding out inside information about what's going on in these companies will help investors make better investing decisions. And he does 2 things. One is he buys a couple shares, which makes him privy to the financial statements. And 2, at 5 o'clock when the whistle blows, he meets the plant workers and starts drinking with them and finding out what's going on inside. And sometimes he can get them drunk enough and they can go out and break in at night and go see. Goldfoot's Dairy Farm, his sons, the farm owner, 2 of his sons work at General Electric. So Bill's getting inside information with this radical idea about going out into the field and exploring it. And they go the whole East Coast, right, all the way down to Fort Myers on the other side of Florida. And by the time that's over, his reports are making people money on Wall Street so successfully that he gets hired. And then he gets a job on Wall Street, right? So then for the next few years, we see the progression of his alcoholism in his story, right? Until it becomes a necessity. Also, we see bathtub gin. He and Dr. Bob do the worst of their drinking during Prohibition, 1919 to 1933. Alcohol is like a drug. It's illegal, right? Not for Dr. Bob. He can write a script, and it's easy to get alcohol. Bill talks about paying off the bars and the delicatessens. You can buy liquor, anywhere. It's speakeasies and in the back of the place and whatnot, all over town, right? So we see Bill's progression. He gets really bad. If you're reading Bill's story, it looks like he's got 3 rehabs. That's because Bill has taken some poetic license. And when he talks about, his brother-in-law, Dr. Leonard Strong, paying for his rehab, and his mother actually contributed to the first rehab, that's because he collapses rehab 1 and 2. They happen in the summer of 1933 is his first rehab. 1 year later, in the summer of 34, is where he actually meets Dr. Silkworth, and Silkworth gives him the doctor's opinion, the obsession of the mind and the allergy of the body, right? Silkworth is a smart guy, Princeton graduate, Ivy League, Bellevue Medical. He was supposed to be a shareholder in a hospital enterprise, but in 1929, when the Great Depression started, that opportunity went south, and he starts working for $40 a week at Towns Hospital for Charlie Towns, which is a rehab hospital for alcoholics and addicts. And he, like Towns, has a great affinity toward alcoholics and addicts and just takes a love to us, right? Bill says, calls him a medical saint, the little doctor who loved drunks, right? So it's at that second visit in the summer of 34 that Bill gets the doctor's opinion. He goes home, and we see in the book, self-knowledge, that's the answer. Celebrates with Lois. Now that I know what it is, I'm good, right? That's in July of 34. In September, 2 months later, he's already drinking. I know in his story, he talks about 3 or 4 months. We have as Bill sees it. We also have as Lois remembers. We know it was a couple of months, right? And then in the book, you have about, then came the insidious, the day that, he relapses again, right? And that's Armistice Day, November 11th, 1934. That's Veterans Day, we call it today, right? And I don't have time to go through the story, but, he's with another guy. They're at a bar. He's already told the other guy all about being an alcoholic and he can't drink. And the bartender comes over and he goes, "Drinks around the house, boys. It's Armistice Day." and he takes a drink. The other guy looks at him and says, after all you just told me about being an alcoholic, you must be crazy. And Bill's like, yeah, I guess I am. And he's off on his last run, right? 2 weeks later, near the end of that bleak November, 1934 is when his friend Ebby shows up. So in Bill Wilson, so he has the problem from Silkworth, but now he also has the spiritual solution, a spiritual awakening, right, through relationship with God, and a program of action to implement that relationship. So all three things, for the first time in history, have coalesced in one person, in Bill Wilson, right? And now he has everything. For the next 2 weeks, Bill Wilson will still drink. What he will say is that, that he couldn't get the message of what Ebby had said to him out of his mind, right? And isn't that the truth? When you're confronted with the spiritual truth that hits you between the eyes, and that God holds your eyelids open so that in no waking moment thereafter can that truth not be seen. All of us, if we've been here for a few minutes, have experienced that. Bill Wilson knows there's something going on. Ebby's got it. By the way, in Ebby's version of the story, Bill walks Ebby to the subway at 1 o'clock in the morning after making the cross-up call. And Bill puts his arm around Ebby's shoulder and says, I don't know what you have, Ebby, but I want it, right? So Bill goes to Oxford Group meetings for the next 2 weeks. And he said to Lois, if it ever gets that bad again, I'm going to go to Towns Hospital. On December 11th, 1934, Lois finds a note saying, I've gone back to Towns Hospital. And he walks into Towns Hospital with a bag of beer, open beer in hand, drinking, says to Silkworth, I've got it. Silkworth says, yeah, I can see you have, Bill. Why don't you get up to your bed on the second floor? But he didn't mean that. Just like Ebby, he meant that now, not only did he know the problem, but he knew the solution and a program of action to implement that solution, and that he was going to do it, right? So we had that 1, 2, 3 conversion. A few days later, Ebby shows up on the 14th, and Bill says, hey, would you run through that program again, the steps, the Oxford Group steps? Ebby runs through it again. Bill goes into what he calls his dark night of despair, the worst despair ever, because he just can't get over the hump of believing in God. And he cries out and he says, if there is a God, show yourself. And he gets a white light, burning bush experience. The room goes blank. But, he talks about the air running through him, a cool wind running right through his chest. When you have a classic conversion spiritual experience, you are picked up by the ankles, you are shaken upside up and down, and when you are firmly planted on the ground again, your feet grasp new soil. And that's what happened to Bill Wilson. I know people sometimes think that it was the obsession that was lifted. It was mostly lifted. There would be 2 more times, the Mayflower Hotel and in June of 38, when he had just started writing the book. But what Bill Wilson said is what really happened right then is that he felt freedom from alcohol. And most importantly, that from that time on, he never doubted his faith in God. That was actually the essence of his spiritual experience. He never doubted his faith, right? So here we are 5 months later. Bill Wilson is making calls, pulling drunks off bars and out of the gutter. You can't get a single person sober. And he's down on Wall Street, and he's talking to a stranger. And within 20 minutes, he says, I'm talking to the stranger, and all of a sudden, 20 minutes later, I find myself inserted in a proxy fight in Akron, Ohio, for the National Rubber Machine Company. And then Bill says, on what slender threads our destiny does hang. I started this little conversation with a stranger. A half hour later, I'm on my way to Akron, right? Right before he goes to Akron, he goes and visits Dr. Silkworth and says to Silkworth, I've been trying to get drunk sober for 5 months. It hasn't worked, and I need to get back on track and make some money. Lois has been supporting me for years. This thing doesn't work anyways. Your life and mine probably held in the balance. Silkworth could have said, you suck at this, Bill. Yeah, right? But he didn't. He said, you got to talk to these alcoholics for the message of weight and depth, the medical message that I gave you about the obsession of the mind and the allergy of the body. And then after you have their attention, you can talk to them about your other medicine, the spiritual Oxford Group, right? So in AA, I know there's people are always arguing recovering versus recovery, quality versus quantity. And in AA, there's a group of people that want to pitch a tent on a campsite that says AA is all about not drinking. There's another group that wants to pitch a tent on a campsite that says, no, AA is about God. What Bill Wilson discovered in that conversation with Silkworth with not which campsite to take the alcoholic to, but which campsite to take him to first. He doesn't have the steps in order. He's preaching from a moral and spiritual hilltop, shoving God down people's throats, and alcoholics are running for the hills. In Akron, the proxy fight goes south. Bill Wilson is in the Mayflower Hotel. He's going back and forth. He can hear the bar, the tingling, the glasses, the music. On the one hand, turn left and go into the bar and drown your sorrows. And on the other hand, go make a call and try to get an alcoholic. He gets a roll in the Indian Head Nichols. He goes to the church directory, sees William Tunks on there, calls William Tunks. And Tunk means to go for a walk in New York, maybe in Vermont, maybe registered. He gets with Tunks, Reverend Tunks, who knows about the Oxford Group. I'm not going to have time to do it, but the Oxford Group has landed in Akron as a result of a relationship with Harvey Firestone, Firestone Tire and Motor, and Tunks is Firestone's minister. Dr. Bob has been going to Akron Oxford Group meetings for 2.5 years. Bill Wilson's only been for a half a year. Dr. Bob has read the Bible twice. He has gone to church. He goes to meetings and he prays. And if his sponsor, Bill Wilson, doesn't show up, right, he dies drunk with a Bible on the nightstand, right? Bill Wilson calls up, makes a series of calls. He gets with Henrietta Seiberling and says, I'm a rum hound from New York, and I'm afraid I might drink. I need another alcoholic to talk to. Instead of calling 911, Henrietta Seiberling thinks this is manna from heaven, prayers answered. She's Ann Smith's, Dr. Bob's wife's best friend. They've been going to Oxford meetings together. She's been praying for Dr. Bob's sobriety. She says, I got somebody, come on out. It's Saturday, May 11th. 1935, right? And Bill Wilson goes out, tells his story. She says, I have a guy for you. She calls over to Dr. Bob's house and says, yeah, that's great, but Saturdays are bad. We can't make it. Henrietta's like, no, I got a guy with a cure for alcoholism. Ann's like, yeah, Saturdays are bad. But luckily for you and me, Henrietta is suffering from untreated Al-Anonism and will not let Ann go, and secures a promise that Ann will bring Dr. Bob over tomorrow, Sunday, May 12th, 1935. If you've ever heard Dr. Bob, we only have a couple talks of Dr. Bob's. His great talk, Love and Service, from the 1950 International. He died shortly thereafter in November of 1950. And his one long great talk in 48 in Detroit, right? And he talks about, how you feel when you're drunk and you're hungover, and the last thing you want to hear is anybody talking about your drinking. But on the other hand, you kind of owe the wife, when Ann said to Henrietta, well, we can't come over, tomorrow's Mother's Day, and Dr. Bob has just come in the house with a potted plant for me for Mother's Day, and the only thing more potted than the plant is Dr. Bob under the kitchen table. He's too drunk to make it. So Dr. Bob agrees to go over on Sunday. The last person alive to be at that 12-step call between Bill and Bob was Dr. Bob's son, Smitty. He was a great communicator. We lost him about 17 years ago, 2004, but he was a speaker in Al-Anon, and he used to talk about Dr. Bob being such a stoic. He said he was all excited when Dr. Bob was going to give him the birds and bees talk. Dr. Bob pulls him into the bathroom and says, son, flies cause disease. Keep yours closed. And that's it. Smitty says, I was kind of looking for something more than that, right? But he said Dr. Bob was a stoic and kept everything close to his vest and didn't share much. Smitty said about Bill Wilson that Bill Wilson was a visionary and could see further down the road than any other human being I ever met in my entire life, right? He said on the way over, Dr. Bob says, I'm going to give this mugger from New York 15 minutes. We're going to make it snappy. They walked in at 5 p.m. They left at 11:15 p.m. That's not snappy. That's 6 hours and 15 minutes. Bill can see Dr. Bob is shaky. He can say, I see you'd like a drink. He knows exactly what Dr. Bob is feeling. Dr. Bob looked at Bill and said, better men than you have tried their wares on me. What the hell are you going to tell me? Dr. Bob he's a doctor, right? He knows about alcohol as much as the AMA knows at the time. It'll take the AMA 3 decades to catch up with Silkworth, right? And your life and mine probably held in the balance. And instead of preaching from a moral or spiritual hilltop, for the first time, Bill looks at him and says, I didn't come here to help you. I came here to help me. And we have the first 12-step called from a position of mutual weakness. Now, I love in Alcoholics Anonymous, we talk about sharing experience, strength, and hope. What the hell is our strength? The unity of shared weakness. That's our strength. And for the first time, Bill makes a call out of weakness, out of powerlessness, not preaching from the hilltop. And he's got the steps in order for the very first time. And it's the first successful 12-step call ever made. You know, Bill said that, you know, I gave him the doctor's opinion, and even though he's a doctor, he didn't know it. What Dr. Bob said was much more important than that, was that it was the first time anybody talked about alcoholism from their own experience, right? Now, Dr. Bob does relapse, going to the AMA convention in New Jersey, you know, a couple of weeks later, and then Bill sobers him up when he comes back, and Bill has sobered him too far down. It's June 10th, 1935. He sobered him too far, and Dr. Bob says, I'm going to go through with it. Bill thinks he means an operation or surgery that he has to do that day. He's a proctologist. He operates on assholes like us, right? That's not what he meant. What he meant was, once again, that 1, 2, 3 conversion. You've given me the problem, and I know about the solution, the program of action to implement the solution, and I'm going to do it. I've never shared with anybody, but I'm going to share right now, and you're going to hear it. And he does what we would consider a fifth step with Bill. He doesn't show up after the surgery. He doesn't return, right? Now, we have no record of what happened to the guy, but as far as we know, you know, the guy didn't die. There's no record of anybody dying that day. You know, he may have whistled when he walked, you know, but he didn't die, right? And it says that, you know, although nobody had realized, well, Dr. Bob doesn't show up until between 11 and 12 o'clock that night back at Ann's house. They think Ann thinks he's drinking, right? And he says, I've been out mending fences. So just as I built a case that the Oxford group could be founded on the back of the 8th and 9th step amends, so too could Alcoholics Anonymous. Dr. Bob runs through all his steps that day, and he will never drink again. And that was the birthday that we celebrated a couple of days ago, right? So I just want to say a couple of things. I know I'm running out of time here and I ran long. Couple of things. One is, I remember years ago at a symposium on AA history, Mel B, the guy that I knew with the longest sobriety, died a few years ago, was 67 yeyears. But I got to talk to him and meet him a few times. And I remember asking him, you wrote the definitive history for General Service Conference Approved Literature of AA. It's called Pass It On, right? What's the most amazing thing? And he said, the most amazing thing is that something that started so fragile has lasted so long. I remember asking Clancy the same question, you know, my grant sponsor, before he died. He didn't know that about my conversation with Mel. And he said the most amazing thing is that something that has lasted so long and helped so many, and that the very first thing that the newcomer wants to do when he gets here is change it. So with closing, let me read one quick thing to you and I'm done. This is my favorite definition of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? In almost magical fashion, Alcoholics Anonymous was able to give its religious and non-religious members alike a view of the universe and their place in it that was both exciting and spiritual. In doing so, they borrowed from religion everything that was powerful and uniting, while politely declining everything that was self-serving and conflicting. You might call it the spiritual heist of the century. And they did it all unconsciously without even realizing it. Happy birthday, AA. God bless you. Thank you.
Awesome. Way to go. All right, everybody should be able to unmute yourselves if you like. Give them a big round of applause. That was so great, Tom. Thank you.
There you go, Tom. Thank you.
Woo. We've got just a couple of minutes, so I'm going to ask for maybe if we have a couple of questions from the audience. If anybody would like to raise their hand with a question for Tom.
If nobody has questions, I have two quick ones, Tom, that I bet you know off the top of your head. The first one is, how many times did Lois and Bill move before they finally settled down? And then the second one is, did Bill make a blacked out altar call prior to getting sober?
Oh, the answer to both is yes. And Lois said about 51 places.
Woo.
The only place that they stayed at for any length of time was in 1940 at the newly reopened 24th Street Clubhouse before the spring of 1941, that when they moved into Stepping Stones. Bill Wilson, following Eddie's telling him about getting sober in the Oxford group, and this spiritual movement, starts going to meetings at the Episcopal Calvary Mission. The Oxford group meetings held at, at Sam Shoemaker's place, and he goes drunk and makes an altar call for Jesus Christ, drunk out of his mind, and has to be told later about what he said.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you.
All right. One more question. Anybody else like to take a stab at it?
Stump the speaker.
Stop the speaker.
Was that reading that you did at the end, was that something that you put together, or is that something that I could look that up and get a copy of that last part about what you just read?
Tyrone, I love your question, and it was my first question the very first time I heard it. And I heard it, my favorite living communicators when I got to AA were Sandy B and Bob B, which did my favorite conferences together. Obviously, we lost Sandy a half dozen years ago, but those two together, I saw lots of them together. They were my favorites. And anyways, Sandy used to quote it, and Sandy himself said that he did not know where it came from. The only reason I know it word for word is I bought a tape of Sandy saying it, and I replayed that tape 100 times until I had every word down. But
You're
Sandy,
talking about Sandy B, right?
yes,
Yeah.
Sandy B.
Sandy
But
Beach.
that being said, I'm a literature guy, and Sandy and I have the same, Sandy Beach and I had the same form of meditation, the same intellectual, spiritual curiosity. His and my sobriety very, very close, the way I do it. And his feeling, and my feeling too, is that it sounds more like Ernie Kurtz than anybody else I've ever read. And that being so, I can't find Ernie Kurtz where he's quoted saying that. But Sandy and I, we talked about it, and we were on the same page with that.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much for your presentation. This last couple of weeks has just really been incredible. Really, really, I feel so blessed and privileged to have been a part of this. So I just want to say thank you again. Please remember to the people at the Eastside Alano Club that next week the club is not open for Saturday Night Live. We will only be on Zoom. We'll be back at the club the first week of July. Okay, so other than that, we're going to keep the Zoom room open for about 15 extra minutes. And Tom, I would like to ask you, would you so kindly close us out with a prayer of your choice?
I will. Thank you for asking me. In the big book, in the steps, when Bill wrote the steps, he incorporated 2 prayers, the 3rd step and 7th-step prayer, specifically and literally. Although the steps are replete with prayers, we can find, the 6th step is no less a prayer step than the 7th, and the 8th step is no less a prayer step. At any rate, the steps are replete with prayers, they're full of it. But my favorite prayer is what Bill later adopted as our 11th-step prayer, and that shows up in the 12 and 12 in Bill's discussion of the 11th step. So if you have a 12 and 12, if you went to page 99, you would find what I'm about to read. And it's my favorite prayer. And I think, as Bill did, Bill really looked to St. Francis as a spiritual leader. And I think this prayer encompasses more of 12-step recovery than anything else I've probably read, right? Lord, I'm on the middle of page 99 in the 12 and 12. Lord, make me a channel of thy peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy, Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen.
Well done,
You
Tom.
guys can hear that. There's thunder, and lightning crackling over my head.
Oh, wow.
So if I get knocked off, just so you know, it's like it's divine, right?
It's divine.
Right, divine in nature.
Well done, Tom.
Spiritual calculus and AA voodoo, right?
Yep. Where there's thunder, there's Tom.
Yeah.
God bless you, Tom. Audio accompaniment.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Love you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for your service, Amy.
Thank you, Tom.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I have to say that this is the best birthday ever.
Your birthday? Yeah, today. Oh, yeah. Why was I smart enough to go?
Tom, when you talked about they went from New York down to Florida, is that the motorcycle ride? Is that when they?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, and we know,
Yeah.
once again, since
Oh, there he goes.
He froze.
There's the thunder and
Oh,
lightning.
you gone? Yeah. Huh? Video's gone. Oh, his video's gone. Turn your video back on, Tom. Or not. It's okay.
I think it's
Love
Stop
you either
that
way.
storm.
That's a funny storm. It only knocked out his video. Just kidding.
Yeah, because he's still there.
Yeah.
Lily.
Hi, Willis.
Willis.
Hello, Willis.
Willis.
Oh, what a cutie pie.
Fluffy.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Lily.
Lily. And Randy.
Yes.
And Randy too, yeah.
Randy, hi.
I guess Karen signed off already.
She had enough of you.
See, look, honey, Amy's got shelves for the cats behind her.
Where?
Yeah,
Oh,
Gotta point it up. There you
I
go.
think there's a cat up there too.
Yep.
up there too.
We'll show you our new,
Oh,
Really?
awesome.
on.
Hey, I'm not the only crazy cat lady out there.
climb up the cat tree. Actually, that's a cat bed. It's not supposed to be, but it is.
Uh-huh.
Cat tree, and then they jump, well, one of them jumps from side to side.
Yeah. Oh, that's great, Brian.
Is it-
Oh, Tom's back.
There he
There's
is.
Tom.
Unmute.
Unmute yourself.
Or not.
my electric went out and
Uh-oh.
the TV and the computer and the printer and everything just went, and now it looks like it's trying to come back. Right.
There you go.
Yeah.
Great job, Tom. Thank you.
And the sad part is that what I was sharing was the secret of life.
Yeah.
And the problem is that it was divine inspiration. It was guidance. I went into two-way prayer as soon as I heard the lightning and thunder. And I can't actually repeat any of it because, like I said, it was guidance. It's guidance. And I know it was the secret. It was.
You're supposed to write it down as it was coming.
I know. But the lights went out and I couldn't see.
Lights out, nobody home.
Lights out. That was me for decades. Yeah, lights out.
You're here.
Yeah, here. So everybody else is having nice. I'm in the middle of a really severe thunderstorm. Obviously, just started.
Use the
No worries.
Yeah, we need the rain. That's true.
Not much rain's coming with it, though, I don't think.
Yeah,
Yeah. I got a question for you, Tom.
yeah.
How many times do we believe Evie and Bill met? in that whole story. We know he met and left and went to the train station the first time.
Right.
They met it, how many more times did they meet before?
So we don't know, and again, it goes to the oral society, sober by anecdote, and it goes to Bill. Bill was so self-deprecating. He was always putting himself down at the expense of himself, but for the greater good, you know. And my feeling is that they met a few times, and we don't know how many. You know, maybe it was 2, 3 times, maybe 4 times. I don't know, but I know that when Abby was later confronted about, well, we've got Bill's story, and Bill, he talks about, you know, the one time, and there's no walking you to the subway at 1 o'clock in the morning. And Abby's reply was, well, yeah, I know Bill has his version. He was drunk and I was sober. So, you know, we've got Abby, I guess it was in 54 in Texas, you know, and that's during Abby's longest sobriety, you know, talking about, you know, his experiences with Bill. But Abby was so, you know, Abby and Bill had a tremendous relationship, and Abby never, you know, confronted it as though Bill wasn't telling the truth, and Bill never confronted it like that either. They talked about it as though, you know, well, we both have our versions. But Bill, you know, also when you look at the big book and you look at Bill's writings, Bill had the best description of Bill was Ernie Kurtz's question. And it was, you know, how do we aim what we thirst for? And what Bill thirsted for is, how do I help as many as effectively as possible? That is the defining aim. You know, I know Bill Wilson, we're often told, you know, is a man on a mission. Hey, Bill and Bob aren't men on mission. They're men under guidance. You know, like the idea that Bill didn't drink, it's just unbelievable. And Bill was not one to, the parable and the story and the lesson that could be learned to help as many as possible was always more important than his individual, you know, prestige or personality. And he always put the greater good in helping as many as possible above that. And as a result, we have, you know, story over sometimes actual historical accuracy. Yeah. And that's the, you know, I know Joe and Charlie, God bless them, you know, the textbook stuff, you know, and they helped hundreds of thousands of people. But on the other hand, so on the one hand, we look at the plus, like how many tons and tons of people got into the book and got more interested, and I love that. But on the other hand, people also went down a road that's, you know, can often be a little challenging as far as their maturing in their sobriety and trying to realize, you know, I come at it from a literature standpoint, being a, you know, just highly educated literature. Who's the author and what is his intent? You know, what's he trying to do? Not what are we trying to do with it?
You never do.
And Bill was about story, right? We know that.
Somebody's meowing. Is it dinner time? I guess you guys are ahead of us, so it'd be pretty late if it's dinner time.
Does we feed the cat? Yeah, 9:15 here.
Oh my God, it's time for a protein shake.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, you want some chocolate cake, kitten? Want some chocolate cake?
All right, I am gonna go grab some dinner.
All right, you're allowed.
Hi, Tom.
Yeah.
Great job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support and the opportunity to say happy birthday to Alcoholics Anonymous.
And
My pleasure.
The second,
And to Amy.
the second greatest story ever told.
Well, thank you, Tom.
Good night.
Yes,
Had a great time.
hey, good night, Brandy. Good night, Amy. Good night,
Night.
Michelle.
Good night. Good night, Brian. Good night, Pat. Good night,
Night.
See you
Randy.
again.
See you on the 10th.
Yeah, we'll see you soon again.
Yep.
By the way, Luann says she can't make it that night.
I know. I talked to her today. Yeah.
I was gonna ask her to introduce you. So,
You'll be
how
stuck
about-
to it yourself now.
Pat, you want to introduce Brian for us? On July 10th?
July 10th? Let me make sure I'm here. Let me just look real quick. it doesn't really matter, I could do it on the phone, huh?
Right, you could do it, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean,
I'll
but
be
get to
here.
not be, you
Yeah,
know,
I'll be here, that's cool.
get to
Yeah.
not be a Dave Chappelle at the Hard Rock or something like that, you know? Which is what I'm now doing on August 7th. but-
Oh, he's coming here too.
Yeah, I'll do that, sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, guys,
I'll be
Hey.
in touch shortly
Bye.
before the date, Brian, okay?
Oh, Brian,
you got it. Great meeting, thank you.
I don't.
Thank
think-
you.
You don't think we know
I'll make
what?
something up.
Good job, honey.
I think Susan fell asleep.
Maybe.
Whoa, that was great. He really packed it in tonight. No fluff.
Woo! Now I
Yeah,
have like a page and a half of notes here.
I know. I'm gonna have to watch the recording because I missed some stuff. He was going so fast.
Yeah. Oh, I know. And I know I missed a whole bunch of stuff too. I've never been a fast note taker. Like I don't think I ever worked out like a good shorthand for myself to take notes fast enough. But that
So
was good.
Did somebody answer that John Bach on how to get the recordings? Is there a way to?
Okay. I actually am looking at chat box for the first time right now.
Oh,
Let's see.
I didn't know, and I didn't want to interrupt anyone to say something, but
Right.
if he's resourceful, he'll find a way, right?
Yeah,
Come back to one of our meetings.
right. Yeah, I don't see, did he put it in the chat box?
Yeah, it says,
Oh.
oh, he directed it to me.
Okay, that's why I don't see it.
I feel terrible because I don't know. That was one thing I didn't know.
Do you remember what his name was?
John Bach, B-O-C-K.
Okay, I'll just note that. Okay. No worries, because I mean, I'll definitely get the recordings to Pat and Brian and Luann, like more, and hopefully it's people that are connected to them. But Patrick, our local Patrick, he is the one that is really knowledgeable about making recordings AA ready, like under AA guidelines kind of thing, and how they can be posted. He's so busy though, he hasn't had time. And so I did ask him to teach me. And so this coming week, we're going to get together online and have him teach me how to do it. So then I will, because I have Pat's, I have the Hia, I have Phyllis, I have Glenn, and now Tom, weeks 1 and 2. So I have all of those that I'm still holding on to, but I'd really like to put them somewhere where people can easily access them for free.
Yeah. So was Phyllis there the whole time or did she show up at the end? I
I didn't notice.
Yeah, I don't think she was there unless she had her camera off and I didn't notice her name. But I feel like she might have got the times wrong and came in right at the end.
Oh no,
Yeah.
that's weird because the text message I sent, it says 7 p.m. Central and 8 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, I don't know. Or she was just really late, or she had her camera off and I didn't notice that she
Right.
was there. Because I think if she was there in the beginning with her camera on, people would have been talking to her a little bit,
Right.
before
Yeah,
then.
I would think so too. And I know like I scrolled through the participants to see who was here. I think maybe 5 minutes into Tom talking, and I didn't notice her then. I think I was kind of specifically looking for just to see who was here, And I noticed that Barry made it, Luann's other friend, Barry, that he spoke. I don't even remember which month that was, but sometime in this last year he spoke too.
Yeah, I remember him.
Okay. Yeah, so he made it tonight. I saw that. I don't know. I think the most we had at one point was 51.
50. 50 that I saw, there might have been 51 at one point. Last week was more well attended, but it might be because it's
Graduation.
Father's Day and, oh yeah, graduation.
I think the reason for the lower attendance is because of graduation.
And parties.
Yeah, it's all the high schools are graduating this weekend.
Yeah.
So I imagine that's why. But that's okay. I mean, it's still a decent turnout.
Yeah. Oh, very. From all over. We had Australia, we had Germany. Oh no, he lives here, but he's Irish.
That's right. That guy said it was like 2:00 in the morning. That's incredible.
Yeah, but there was a lot going on today, AA wise too, that was all really cool. When I
Yeah,
looked at a lot of the flyers and stuff.
yeah.
Well, it looks like Saturday morning is gonna go back in person in 2 weeks.
Okay, so I'll be the last Zoomer
Yeah,
presentation.
we're gonna stay hybrid though.
Oh, okay.
But
Good.
we could probably go, we're gonna go on Thursday night to the church and do our tech run and see what the internet's like and all of that stuff. Because they were gonna run a new Ethernet cord down.
Oh,
But
nice.
yeah, and then we could probably go back this Saturday, but we kind of agreed after the meeting today, we stayed and kind of whoever was there just kind of agreed that maybe we should wait a week, and then if we find out we can get in, have one more week where we can let everybody know.
Mhm.
And then I said that'd be great too, because our speaker next week is not from here anyways, and is in Madison. And so yeah, but we're gonna stay hybrid because there's a couple of people that consider us our home group that moved out of state. We're still recording our conversation.
Oh gosh, I totally forgot to stop it.
I'm glad you caught that